Blessed be the God of Israel, who comes to set us free, to visit and redeem us, and grant us liberty. The Benedictus. I hear that's the word that priests use these days to talk about my song. That song that I sang all those years ago. I suppose that works if you're into Latin. The word I would use, I would choose overwhelmed by joy, by hope, by gratitude, by love. It was the 8th day after my son's birth. That's a very important day for my people, you know. I mean, this was the day that we would present him in the temple. This is the day that he would get his name. This was the day when he would be circumcised as a sign that he was a part of God's covenant people, the chosen ones. By the way, I hear you still practice that today? These old ears were quite surprised to hear that. A little barbaric, don't you think? But I digress. It was the 8th day after my son's birth. But wait a minute. Before I tell you that, I should probably share a little bit about who I am and about what happened before that day. My name is Zechariah. It means God remembers. You know, names are important in my tradition. Names should mean something. Names should tell you something about the person. Maybe you're familiar with the names of some of my people. Isaac, does that one sound familiar to you? Laughter. Jacob. Heel grabber. Ruth, loyal companion. Names matter. But I don't think that my parents could have had any idea just how significant the name they chose for me would become. I mean, it made sense. Zechariah, God remembers. After all, I come from a long line of priests. Ever since the day that King David had appointed my ancestor Abijah, our line had been fulfilling our priestly duties in the temple, taking our turns as Israel's representative before God and all the people. It was our job to help remind the people that indeed God does remember, and God is faithful to the covenant. Isn't it funny that sometimes those of us who know the story the best are the ones who are also the quickest to forget? It's exactly what happened to me on that unforgettable fall day. There I was, as the one who had been chosen on that occasion to enter into the most holy of places and offer up sweet-smelling incense. Me, a priest, one who would enter the Lord's sanctuary while the people waited and worshiped just outside. Me, as one who was supposed to be an example for them, to model for them what it meant to trust and obey. And on that day, I failed them. I failed to trust. Yes, I'm afraid it's true. It happened just the way that Dr. Luke told it in his memoirs. I went in that day. I went in to offer incense and sacrifice, and there as I knelt before the altar, an angel appeared. His name was Gabriel, God's able-bodied one. And in case you're wondering, yes, that is the same Gabriel who also visited Mary. But did you know that he came to visit me 6 months before he went to visit Mary? But I digress again. People tell me that happens in your old age. Anybody familiar with that? Speaking of old age, have I mentioned yet that I was already quite old when I entered the sanctuary that day? Anyway, there I was, kneeling before the altar, when this able-bodied angel appears hovering over the altar. I see you have an angel on your altar this morning. Well, let me just tell you that the angel I saw that day didn't look anything like this one. Oh no, this able-bodied angel was male and was quite different. Looked a little more like, what's that actor you watch these days? Diesel. That's more like what that angel looked like. So forgive me if tumbling turbans, I was a little bit scared when he showed up. And you know what the first thing he said was? Do you know? Don't be afraid, Zechariah. As if I wasn't going to have a little bit of fear in this old man's heart at seeing such a sight above the altar. Thank goodness he kept talking. The next thing he said was, Zechariah, your prayers have been heard. And it didn't take long before I realized as he continued to speak, he wasn't talking about the prayers that I came in to offer for the people that day. He was talking about my prayers. He was talking about the secret longings that I had kept locked deep within my heart for years. The ones that I hadn't even uttered to Elizabeth for fear that I would make her feel even worse about being childless for so long. It was the prayers that I had lifted silently to the Lord over and over and over again. And there it was. There I was in that place. And God had heard me. And an angel had appeared to tell me that God had heard me. And I failed to trust. On that day, when Gabriel showed up to tell me that, in fact, exactly what I had been praying for was going to happen, I no longer had the faith to believe it. Have you ever had that happen? Gabriel went on and told me more about this child that would be born. That I wouldn't only have a son, but this boy would grow up to do great things. He would be a part of God's plan for salvation, a part of preparing the way for Messiah. My son would be one who helped lead people back to God again. And his name? Gabriel told me that his name must be John, God's gracious gift. It was more than I could hope for or imagine. And so I didn't trust. And so Gabriel pronounced my sentence for my disbelief. A 9-month timeout from speaking. Imagine that, a priest who can't say anything for 9 months. But that's exactly what Gabriel told me. And so for the entire time that Elizabeth would carry this child, I would be speechless. Imagine the surprise on the people's faces as I went out of the sanctuary that day and could not say a word to them. They must have seen something different in my face, something that told them an extraordinary thing had occurred. But no matter how hard I tried, just as Gabriel had said, I couldn't get any words to come out. I couldn't tell them anything about the news that I had just received. Those 9 months, though, they turned out to be one of God's greatest gifts to me. Left without a voice, I didn't leave the house very much during those days. And in the silence, God was working on me, preparing me. God was shaping my heart and my faith for the message that I would deliver one day that would be the most important one I ever had delivered. And not only that, because I didn't leave the house very much in those days, that day when Mary showed up to visit Elizabeth, I was there. I saw it with my own eyes. You know that thing that Luke talks about? How my son, while he was still in the womb, did that moving around? It really happened. Not like anything I'd ever seen. It was as if he was a little drummer boy banging on the inside wall of his mother's belly. Craziest thing you ever saw. And Elizabeth, oh, how I wish you could have seen her that day. She was already 6 months pregnant by this time. She was tired. I mean, pregnancy is never easy. At least that's what I hear. But for her, at her age, it was exhausting. And on top of that, she had a husband with whom she couldn't even share a conversation. But that woman, I am so proud of her. Because from the day that Mary showed up to tell her about her pregnancy, she was all in. Her faith in God soared. It was as if she became crystal clear about the amazing plan that God was orchestrating that would involve her child and Mary's child together. She shared such love and offered such attention to Mary during those days and gave her a safe place to stay for those first 3 months. Mary left just a few days before Elizabeth was to deliver. I could talk forever about the day our son was born. It was the perfect day. The joy that I saw on Elizabeth's face when she saw him for the first time. The longings that bubbled up from deep within me for words to be able to speak my gratitude to God for how good God had been to us. It was the perfect day. But alas, it is getting late. And I still haven't told you the rest of the story about that day that we were in the temple with him. And I really must share that before I go. It was the 8th day after my son's birth. And all of the family had come together with us to celebrate. They were hovering around Elizabeth, waiting for her to announce his name. I still couldn't speak. And I was beginning to wonder, quite frankly, if I would ever talk again. And so there they were waiting for Elizabeth to say the word. Now, for a week before this, mind you, they had all been offering their suggestions. Everybody seemed to have their idea about what we should name our son. All family names, lots of them. Some I didn't even remember. But then the one that everyone seemed to be able to rally around, Zechariah. It's a good name. And it was a name that would have made great sense. After all, this was our firstborn son. And at our age, sure to be our only child. What a wonderful gesture by our family. It was the perfect choice in their opinion. It's just that it's not the name that God had chosen. Not the one that God had put on Mary's heart or my heart. Elizabeth did not deny or confirm any of their suggestions, of course. It wouldn't have been right to share the name before the proper time. So now here we were on the 8th day, and they all leaned in close with Elizabeth. And you could hear them say collectively, well? And they were just certain that the word they would hear coming out of Elizabeth's mouth was Zechariah. Except that they didn't. No, when she said instead, no, his name will be John, you should have heard them. You would have thought, by the way the family reacted, that she had committed blasphemy in that moment. John? Who is John? Why in the world would you name him John? We don't have anybody in the family named John. Elizabeth, what are you thinking? And then, when they realized that this calm and steady and strong woman was not going to give them any different answer from that, well, then someone pointed my way. I could see what was going to happen next. Mama hadn't given them the answer they were looking for. And so now they would go to the father, the man of the house, to see what he had to say about things. Please tell me that doesn't still happen today? So here I was, and like a migration of little ants on a sugar packet, they all came over to me. And they waited. And since I still couldn't speak, I motioned to my nephew to get me a tablet. Not like the ones you have today, those fancy ones with the screens. No, I'm talking about an old-fashioned tablet. And as I waited for him to bring it, I looked over at Elizabeth. And we smiled at each other. You know, even though I couldn't speak for those 9 months, we grew closer during that time than ever before. So when my nephew finally got there with the tablet and handed it to me, I took it and I began to write very slowly. Oh, I had fun drawing this out, let me tell you. His name is. And then I stopped for a minute and looked up and looked in each one of their faces around me. I glanced back at Elizabeth one more time, and this time, as well as a smile, I saw a tender tear of joy coming down her cheek. And then I put my head down again, and again, very slowly, I wrote, John. And then I thought to myself, God's gracious gift. And that's when it happened. That is when God unlocked my lips and I sang. I sang and I sang and I sang. And God kept filling my mouth with words to sing about what God was doing in that amazing moment. It was a song of God's faithfulness and love. It was a song of blessing. It was a song of salvation and hope. It was a song of peace. And it was a song that reminded me and anyone who could hear me that day of what I had forgotten the day that Gabriel showed up. God remembers. God remembers. Thank God. God remembers. On prisoners of darkness, the sun begins to rise. The dawning of forgiveness upon the sinner's eyes, to guide the feet of pilgrims upon the paths of peace. Oh, bless our God and Savior with songs that never cease.